So, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna start the way that we often start here, and we're gonna have a conversation about a passage, and then we're gonna lead that into the rest of the Bible stuff. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read this passage, Genesis 29 verses 1 through 11. I'm gonna read it, and then what I want you to do is I want you to find a character. We've done this before. I want you to find a character in the that we're reading about. Pick somebody, and then when we read it a second time, because we're going to read it a second time, then we're going to, and then we're just going to think about the passage from that person's perspective, and then we'll just talk about what you think is going on from that person's perspective. Okay, so let me just read this first. Once again, Genesis 29 verses 1 through 11, and we will, and so just kind of think about the story and think about somebody that you might want to choose. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land to the people of the east. And as he looked, he saw a well in the field. And behold, 3 flocks of sheep laying beside it, for out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in the place over the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" They said, "Oh, we're from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" They said, "Oh, yeah, we know him." He said to them, "Is it well with him?" They said, "It is well. And look, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep." He said, "Behold, it's still high day. It's not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go, pasture them." He says, "We can't go until the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well, and then we water the sheep." So while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, and she was a shepherdess. Now as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. And then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. Okay, so find someone in that story, just somebody you might think of, and we're going to read it again and then try to then look at the story again from that person's perspective. Okay? Have you guys got somebody? Okay, all right, we're going to do it again. All right, so starting again at verse 1. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep laying beside it, for out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in place over the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" They said, "Well, we're from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" They said, "We know him." He said to them, "Is it well with him?" They said, "It is well. And see, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep." He said, "Behold, it's still high day. It's not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go, pasture them." They said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together, and then the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well, and then we water the sheep." And while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with his father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. Okay, so So what do you think? I mean, the thing is that for me, the person I chose is somebody who wasn't even there. I chose Laban, who's Rachel's father. And just because he heard this, she ran and told her father. So he's hearing this whole story. And I know a little bit about Laban, and I know he's thinking, oh, interesting. Here's a guy who knows how to take care of sheep very well, because he knows better than these shepherds who are doing it. He knows better than they do how to do it. And not only that, he's very strong, because he lifted the stone by himself. Oh, this is a person I can take advantage of. I see, aha. Now I know, now I see somebody who I can use for my own benefit. That's, of course, what he does for 21 years. Anyway, so what do you guys think? For who did you pick, and what do you think?
I picked Rachel,
You picked Rachel.
and I was a little put off that she got kissed,
Okay.
yeah, and with someone that approached as a stranger, for starters.
Pretty, or is really, really forward, huh?
I think so,
Yeah.
yeah.
He kissed her, and then he said, "Oh, by the way, we're family." Really? Okay.
Yeah, and this is the Middle East, you know, which has a different take on the relationship between men and women,
Yeah.
especially strangers.
I know, Diane, I see that you're thinking now, like in Italy, family, cross sexes would kiss each other, but in the Middle East, isn't it just men and men that would kiss each other, and women?
Well, we're talking about, I mean, I don't know if it was okay to kiss cross-gender. We certainly know that they kissed all the time in the Bible, not being a sexual thing.
But not cross-gender.
That's what I'm not sure of.
I don't, yeah.
No, it's a matter of greeting.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it was probably still kind of forward, but it doesn't seem to imply that. However, what I was curious about, which isn't putting myself in the place of any of them,
Mm-hmm.
is when he said, "Behold, it's still high day, it's not time for the livestock to be gathered, you know, go water the sheep, what are you doing?" Maybe that was just a thing of, why are you guys here? But it seems odd that he said it after he saw Rachel. Like, that's what makes me question the whole thing. But maybe it was just he wasn't like his father-in-law. He wasn't as bad as his father-in-law, so,
No, I think he was just thinking, there's a system, there's an
Right,
appropriate
and this
system,
doesn't seem, why are you guys doing it this way?
and he's just like, why are you doing it this way? And they're trying to explain to him, well, you know, we all have to meet here together, we all have to water the flock together, because we all have to lift the stone. And so, yeah.
Mhm.
Did you pick anybody? No, you didn't pick anybody?
Yeah.
Didn't feel that with this one, huh?
No.
Okay. Did you, Tom? Did you pick anybody?
Well, no, I didn't,
Did you-
because,
Do you have any thoughts about the passage from anybody's perspective?
because down at the bottom, when they talked about the brother and the sister of this person and that person, I got all my shoes got tied together so thoroughly that I just threw up my hands and I just said, okay, well, this is over my head. And so when we read it again, and I don't know, is it ADHD in me or something? I don't know, but it was so complex in there that I couldn't pick up anybody, I couldn't identify with anybody because it was a scrambled omelet in there.
Hmm.
And I have to tell you, I still don't understand it, and it's embarrassing to have to admit this, that's how it
Yeah.
happened to me.
No,
It's a bit of a mess.
You're a Bible student from square one, Steve, so
Well,
for you,
and-
this is nothing. but-
and this is, and part of it is because I know this, I know the
Yeah,
story. I
yeah,
know where
exactly.
the story, I know where the stories come from, where Jacob came from and what he was supposed to do, and I know where the story is going. And so-
Jacob is the son of Adam.
No,
No.
Of Isaac. He's the son of Isaac,
Oh, and Isaac is
And-
the son of Adam and Eve.
of Abraham.
Abraham.
Okay,
So Abraham, and so Abraham's family is back in, where he went, from Haran. So Abraham's family is from Haran, but Abraham left his family, went to Canaan, and raised Isaac, and then Isaac raised Jacob there.
okay.
So Isaac sent Jacob back to their old family, to where their cousins were, so that way Jacob could find a wife. And so that now he's just back in the same, he's back where,
He's found them.
yeah, he's found them, he's found the town, and then he found his first cousin, who was Rachel. And so that's what's going on here, is he's finally found his family, and he's fulfilling his father's command, and all that.
In a forward kind of way.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he's kind of a forward guy, I guess, yeah. And so yeah, so that's what's going on here. And of course, the kind of the end of the story, not the end of the story, but the next part of the story is how Jacob ended up marrying Rachel. But it turns out that he had to marry Rachel's sister first, because Laban tricked Jacob into marrying the sister before Rachel. So Jacob, you kind of see here, Jacob is very attracted to Rachel, very much attracted to Rachel. And he had to work for Rachel's father for 7 years, so that way he could marry her. And then they put a veil on her sister and had him marry her. And then he says, the father says, "Oh, well, great. No problem. It's the tradition in our family that the older sister always gets married first. And so you can marry Rachel too. You just have to work for me for another 7 years. That's all." And so this is how Laban ended up tricking Jacob again and again to stay longer and make Laban more money. More sheep, I guess. Technically, it's making him more sheep. So anyway, and so that's kind of the context of what's going on. But all of this is I just want to introduce us to this kind of story, and all of this is to tell you that the Bible is kind of like, in some senses, it's kind of like a novel or a movie. So let's say in a movie, there's a movie that I watched not too long ago called Carol, and the very first scene of the movie and the last scene of the movie were exactly the same, except there were people in different places. There were different people in different places. And so when you're watching a movie and you see a scene and it's exactly the same in two different places, then you're supposed to learn something from that. You're supposed to learn that scene is significant, really significant for that story, and you're supposed to learn something from that. And mostly what you learn is you pay attention. You already know what the scene is going to be, so you pay attention to the differences between those two scenes. And you can watch the two scenes and watch them back to back, and you go, "Oh, I see, this is going on here, and this is just like this. Oh, but see how different that is here, so that's communicating this about this character," and stuff like that. The Bible has the same thing. In fact, a lot of the Bible are scenes that are repeated over and over and over again. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at one particular scene that gets repeated in the Bible multiple times. And we're going to look at the changes, and we're going to see what we can learn about it. Okay, so what we're doing, yeah? I'm sorry?
Yeah. Did you choose someone? No?
Okay, so what we're gonna do is, so after this one, then, we're going to, so please go ahead to, so we can see this scene. There's a few things that I just wanna point out. So we have somebody coming up to a well, and there's a bunch of shepherds and sheep and all of that. And then he does something surprising. I wanna say, by the way, that once again, point out one thing, which is that in this scene, like a whole group of shepherds would lift this stone and move it away, and Jacob just picked it up and moved it by himself. And this is not the first time in the story that we see Jacob doing an amazing feat of strength, something that normal people couldn't do. And so Jacob in this story is just an amazingly strong guy, and almost supernaturally strong. And we see that coming up again and again in his particular story. But that's not the theme that we're going to be focusing on today. Today we're going to be focusing on a man and a woman meeting at a well. This time it is Jacob and Rachel. And of course, they got married, because when we see a man and a woman meeting at a well, they're going to get married. That's what we're communicating. Okay, so let's go to Exodus. Let's go to Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter 2. And in this one, we're going to start at verse 15. We have another major Bible character. We got Moses here. All right, and so if we could have, starting at verse 15, Exodus 2:15 through 21. So if somebody would please read that.
I'll do it.
Okay,
When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. When they came, how far am I reading?
to 21.
Thank you. When they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "Why have you come back so soon today?" So they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and what is more, he even drew the water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he then? Why is it that you've left the man behind? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses was willing to dwell with the man, and he gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses.
Okay, so once again, we've got, instead of Moses meeting one woman, he's meeting 7. Okay, and so once again, it's a little bit different. But the thing is that anybody reading this story about Moses has got Jacob's story in the back of their head.
And Isaac.
We're gonna get to that one. Because that one is really different. So, you know. Okay, so what I'm trying to get is, I'm trying to get the basic story down. And here, between these two stories, we kind of have the basic story down. So Moses, just like Jacob, is somebody who goes from a faraway country and has traveled hundreds of miles to get to this place where he is a complete stranger, a complete foreigner. And then Moses in this case meets the other shepherds, but he sees them as kind of an enemy because they're preventing the 7 women from watering their flock. And so now, if you've ever seen the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, you know that Moses takes up his staff and he beats them all up. But that's not in the story. He doesn't beat them all up. He just somehow prevents them. He stops them, and then so the women could get their flocks watered. And clearly,
This was a regular occurrence.
this was a regular occurrence because the father says, "You're back so early." So this must have happened every day. And he's like, "Oh, you're back so early." And they're just like, "Well, this man came out of nowhere and let us water our flock. He helped us." And of course the reaction is, "Well, where is he? Why isn't he here? You didn't bring him home? What's the matter with you girls?" And so, and so they're like, oh, okay, all right, we'll go get him. So they went and got him and brought him home, and then almost immediately it says, and he let Moses marry one of his daughters. Okay, well, that was fast.
I wonder if it was the oldest one.
According to the Jewish tradition, yes, Zipporah was the oldest of the daughters, and Ruel has another name. Starts with a J. Oh wow, now I've forgotten it. Anyway, he has another name, but he is a priest of the Most High God. So he is a priest of Yahweh, of the God of the Hebrews, but he is a Midianite. And so he's not a Hebrew, but he is a priest of the same God. So, Jethro was his other name. Yeah. Anyway, so this is Moses, and and now he's in the wilderness for 40 years. Ooh, fun. But, Moses didn't mind. Better that than being killed by Pharaoh, so that's always a good thing. All right, now we're gonna go back and talk about Isaac, which is really weird. Okay, so we've got the basic story. The basic story is a guy comes from a foreign land, shows up at a well, meets a woman, at least one, and then they end up getting married. Okay? So that's the basic story that we see in both of these. Now we're going to go back to Genesis 24. Okay, Genesis 24. And now this particular story happens to cover the whole of Genesis 24, and it's a very long story. We're just going to read one chunk of the much longer story. So that way we can kind of get the heart of it out, and then we'll talk about some other parts here. But let's just read the heart of what we're doing here. So Genesis 24, starting at verse 10 through verse 24. Okay, who would like to read that?
I'll read.
Okay.
Okay. Servant prays for guidance. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and left, taking with him all kinds of good things from his master.
This master, by the way, is Abraham. So he's going out from Abraham. Go ahead.
Okay. He set out for Aram Naharaim and made his way to the town of Nahor. He had the camels kneel down near the well outside the town. It was towards evening, the time women go out to draw water. Then he prayed, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, give me success today and show the kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a girl, please let down your jar that I may have a drink, and she says, drink and I'll water your camels too, let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. The servant meets Rebekah. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The girl was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever lain with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, please give me a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all his camels. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring, weighing a beka, and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. Then he asked, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" Is that it?
One more, or actually 2 more verses, please.
Okay. She answered him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, bore to Nahor." And she added, "We have plenty of straw and fodder, as well as room for you to spend the night." Then the man bowed down and worshipped the Lord, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives."
Okay, all right, now this one is really similar to the one with Jacob that we read a couple times, okay? Here you got somebody from Abraham's family going across to Abraham's old family where he came from to find a wife for Isaac. Similar, but it is a little different. So Abraham had charged his servants saying, "You go back to my family back at where I came from originally, and you find a wife for Isaac. And here are all these gifts, and you can pass them on and make sure that you find a decent wife, because none of these people here in this area are good wives for Isaac." Anyway, so the servant goes back and tries to find a wife. So number one, big difference between this story and the other stories that we saw. The other stories, the man who went out to look for a wife went himself. He went himself. This time, Abraham is protecting Isaac. And he's like, "Well, I'm not going to send you." Now, Isaac sent Jacob later on, but no, I'm not going to send you. I'm going to send a servant to do it for you. So he's having a servant go and pick out his wife. But we still have the meeting at the well. Goes all the way across, and meeting at the well, except that here the servant is really nervous. He doesn't know what's going to happen. And so he's praying ahead of time. And he's like, "Well, Abraham gave me this charge to find a wife, but I want to find the right one. I want to find exactly the right wife, and I don't know exactly how to do that. So God, here's the thing. This is the signal to know that I found the right person. I'm going to go and say, 'Hey, could you get my camel some water?' No, I'll
Can I have,
yeah, can I have some water?" And she's just like, "Oh yeah, no, I'll water all your camels, and I'll water your other animals too. And if that person says that, then I'll know it's the right one." And like most of us who are trying to make, arrangements with God, it's a little silly. It's kind of a silly thing, because anybody can say that or not say that. But this is what he had set up. And so he gets there, and then he decides, it's interesting because here's this girl coming up, and she's filling up the water, and he's like, "Oh, this is the one." He's already decided. So he's like approaching her. "Hey, so how about this?" And she's like, and then she gives him the code word back, just as if they had a secret code or something like that. Gives it right back, and he's like, "Yes, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. God has set this up, And that's fine, because it turns out to be Abraham's cousins, or actually nephew and kids. Yes?
it's just that he didn't actually say the thing about it being a miracle until after he found out that she was related.
That's true. It was the whole thing is really,
I think that
Kinda
that's when
weird.
he was like, for sure.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is the right person.
even so, it's the whole thing was just it's a little weird. Anyway, but you see how it's all kind of removed. It's not like the other ones where you've got these men coming up and they're doing direct action and they're doing these amazing feats of strength or prowess or whatever, and then they get this. Then they kind of win the woman. No. Here's a person who is not only is he just praying, "God, lead me to the right person." It's not even for him. Isaac is totally removed from this scene. We do not even see Isaac until the last 2 verses of this very long chapter. Everything is being done for Isaac. It's interesting because what's being communicated here, how different Isaac is as opposed to Jacob or Moses, is that Isaac's whole story is that he is a passive person. He received the blessing, that he received it passively, even early on when he was a young man and his father was going to sacrifice him. He just did whatever his father told him to do. He didn't actually actively do anything. And then later on, he gets a wife because Abraham sends a servant. He doesn't even go and look for a wife himself. And then later on, he passes the blessing, and he doesn't actually get to pass, he doesn't pass the blessing to the person who he wants to. It was the person who Rebecca chose. Because of the 2 of them, here's Rebecca. Rebecca is the action person. She's the one who does things. She's the one who takes charge. And we see that even a little bit in this story. She's the one who takes charge. And between Isaac and Rebecca, she's the one in charge. So she had her favorite, who was Jacob. He had his favorite, who was Esau. Jacob's the one who got the blessing because she's the one who took action and made it happen. It's not a judgment. This story doesn't have a judgment on either one of them. It's interesting that in all of this, they're both saying that these are paths of obtaining God's blessing. Isaac obtained God's blessing, and Rebecca also worked for God's blessing. It all came out in the end for God's work, but Isaac was passive, and we can see that in this story, especially in comparing him to the other ones. So we see, okay, we're learning something about Rebecca, and we're learning something about Isaac in the story, even though Isaac isn't in the story. We're still learning about it because we're comparing these stories to the other ones. Once again, this is the sort of thing that you see again and again, like in movies or novels. So let me bring up another movie in comparison to see exactly what I'm talking about. How many of you have seen the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray? You haven't seen that one?
Have you seen that movie?
Oh, yeah. We've seen it more than once. So Groundhog Day has a story where a person who at the beginning of the movie is a complete jerk, and he wakes up one day, which happens to be Groundhog Day, and we see all the events that he goes through the day, and then and sees how much of a jerk he is, and then he wakes up the next day, except it's not the next day, it's the same day.
Did your kids make you watch this over? Because the kids were little when that came out, so did the kids make you watch this over and over and over
No,
again?
I made them watch it over and over again. I love this movie. Anyway, because I think it's one of the funniest movies ever. Anyway, so he wakes up the next morning and it's the same day. He hated that day. All he wanted to do was get out of this podunk town, and now he's stuck in it another day. So he has to go through the rest of the day, and then he wakes up the next day, and he wakes up on the same day. And so the thing is that in the movie, the same events happen again and again and again, but each day is a little bit different.
Did you drive your kids nuts with this?
No, I don't force my kids to watch movies. I may have driven my wife nuts, but I don't know. And so the thing is that, so he goes through the day over, and it's the same day over and over again, but then each time you go through it, you see the same things happen, except each time it's a little bit different, a little bit different, a little bit different, until at the end, he is no longer a jerk. He has learned how to live a better life because he was forced to live this one, because he was forced to be the best person he could in this one particular day, because according to the way the movie goes, he literally had to live it through thousands of times.
Yeah, that's interesting. I should have got that from that movie. I watched it one time, but all I was left remembering that it's the same thing every day.
Right.
But at the end, there's a lesson in there, and I missed that lesson.
And the lesson in the movie is basically, if we get put in a situation like that, we can learn again and again. When we see a situation again and again and again, we can learn how to do it better. We can learn how to live better if we keep trying. He was forced to do
Yeah.
it. He was forced to do it. But it's a very funny movie, and I highly recommend it. But the thing is that in the Bible,
Because Bill Murray.
I know, he's so brilliant. Anyway, but in the Bible, once again, we see scenes like this, and they come up again and again and again. And each time it comes up, we learn something different. We say, "Whoa, this is different. This is." And so when people first read the first one, I don't know whether the one for Isaac was first because it's earlier in the Bible, or whether one of the other ones was first, because. But when people read this, when they heard this story, they say, "Oh, I know this story. This is the story of the guy who goes to the well and then he ends up beating his wife. I know this story." And so, and I know how it's supposed to go. He's supposed to do some feat of strength or something like that, and then he gets his wife. Okay, I know this story. And wait a minute, this one with Isaac is really weird, because Isaac's not even going to the well. Somebody else is going to the well. That's really weird. And you think about it because it's weird. It's really weird. Okay, now we're going to go to John chapter 4.
I knew it.
Yeah, I know you knew it.
Have you done the study before?
No,
That's what it was.
but woman, man, well,
Okay, so now we go to John chapter 4. And we have to remember that when everyone is reading or listening to the story of John chapter 4, then they have this background, this story that's in their minds. They're thinking about it, okay? They're thinking about the guy who comes to the well and then ends up meeting his wife, okay? Who has come from afar, come from a different nation, and all of this. All right, John chapter 4, we're starting at verse 4.
oh,
Yeah, not at the top. We're
and it's
starting at verse
Jacob's
4.
well.
That's right. So now he, meaning Jesus, had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of the ground Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. Nobody can miss this, right?
It was about the 6th hour.
Right.
NIV.
And so,
You said noon.
okay, yeah.
What is 6th hour? Would that
The
be
sixth,
good?
so generally a day would begin at, well,
That would be the 4th watch of the night, right? It's from 3 to 6.
yeah, that's right. Anyway, that's a weird thing. I don't know why it says the 6th hour. Okay.
But yours doesn't.
Well, it says noon because that's the translation. They're already doing it for you. Anyway.
Okay.
So when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, a woman coming to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah, his disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "Well, you're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" Because Jews didn't associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." Living water, by the way, doesn't mean something spiritual. It means running water, like a stream. He would have given you a stream. That's what Jesus is saying.
Every
Instead of a
time
well,
living
it's-
water,
Mhm.
there's a word for that. I can't think what the engineers call it, but water that's running. Because water that's stagnant is always a problem. Water is always needs to be running, really. If it's not running, then it just goes bad.
Well, but a well often comes from a spring, and so he's saying instead of well water, I would give you a stream. I'd give you running water, like you said, like running water,
Mhm.
and so definitely better water for the most part. "Sir," the woman said, You don't have anything to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, and also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water that I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water, welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so I won't be thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." I love her so much. I wish we had her name. I truly wish we had her name.
Go
Anyway.
call your husband and come back.
Yeah, okay, we'll keep going. He told her, call your husband and come back. She says, "Well, I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you've had 5 husbands, and the man that you have now is not your husband. What you have said is quite true." "Sir," this woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet." Okay, we're gonna take a break here. All right, so once again, we have a stranger who comes from another nation. He's come from afar. He's from Galilee, but he had actually just come from, was either going or coming from Judea. So he went through Samaria, and but he's coming from a different place, from a distant place, and it is clear to her that he is either going to or coming from Jerusalem, and that kind of makes her put off. And of course, he's Jewish. He's so clearly Jewish, and almost all Jewish people wouldn't have anything to do with Samaritans. They wouldn't talk to them. They wouldn't ever touch them. They certainly wouldn't take water from them. Because sharing water would potentially mean that water could spill on their hands, and then you'd be drinking it, and then you'd be unclean, because Samaritans are unclean. Okay, so she's like, you're asking for water, and that's not the way that Jews usually treat me. Jews treat me like dirt, but that's not how you're treating me. That's interesting, but you're still asking me to do something for you. Anyway, and so they have this whole conversation, but it's clear these are people who are very different from each other. They're like night and day, and they shouldn't even really be talking to each other, which she brings out. And then he says, "Well, if you knew who was asking, I'd give you even better water. I got way better water than they do. In fact, this water doesn't ever run out." And she's just like, "Cool, I want this water because I'm tired of having to come to the well every day. It is so tiring. You don't know how tiring it is to come to the well every day and carry this water back home. It is exhausting. And I'd love to stop doing that." And then Jesus says, "Well, go call your husband." "Oh, I don't have a husband." Jesus says, "That's right. You had 5 husbands." And so this is the miracle. This is the big event. This is the event of amazingness that happens. So once again, we've got the stranger coming, meeting a woman at the well, and we've got the big event. And everyone is expecting, now they're going to get married. Because that's how these stories end. They end with the stranger getting married to the person that he meets at the well. There's no other conclusion. It has to end this way. But of course, it doesn't exactly. Instead, it ends a little differently. And so in verse 25, I think it's 25, the woman says, "Oh, I know that the Messiah is coming, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us." And Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, am he." And so here's the thing. Now, the reason that Samaritans were unclean to Jews is because they were like a false teacher, not just because they were of a different race. Now, there's 2 things about Samaritans. First of all, Samaritans were ethnically a mix between Jews and Canaanites, and that goes way back. I'm not gonna get into all that, but basically Canaanites, according to Jews, weren't supposed to exist.
Because they were supposed to snuff them out completely.
Exactly, but God withheld that command at the beginning of Judges. And so he said, okay, I told you to do that before, but now I'm not telling you to do that. And so, but to a lot of Jews, Canaanites just weren't supposed to exist. Now, Jews were part Jewish and part Canaanite. And so part of the background for this is, so that's one thing. When the Jews came back from Babylon, and they were rebuilding the second temple, these were people, the Samaritans said, oh, we would like to help rebuild the temple. And the Jews, the Judeans said, no, you're too impure to help us rebuild the temple. We don't want to have anything to do with you, so stay away from our temple and all that. And from that day on, the Samaritans and the Jews were enemies.
Is it still that way today? There's a town of Samaria, I couldn't find it on my list of maps. I have the maps in the back of my Bible.
You have to look at specifically at the first century map. It's only in the first century. And Samaria is, you'll see Samaria like smack in the middle of ancient Jewish map.
Does this have any relation to the Palestinian issue?
Yes, it does, but not really. I mean, the thing is that the Samaritans, there are still Samaritans today. Maybe there's about 40 of them.
Okay.
There's about 40 of them left. There's not hardly more. But what happened was that the Samaritans, when they found out that they couldn't help the Jews build their temple, they went ahead and said, well, fine, we're just going to build our own temple. And they built a temple in the north. And so they started worshiping God in the way that they understood best, according to the Bible that they had in the north. And then it was, but the thing is that what it really comes down to, and the reason that it's kind of connected to the Palestinians, is because northern peoples, the peoples of the north, have always been considered half-class citizens of the Jewish people. It's always been that way, right from the very beginning.
Still today?
It's still today. That's kind of one of the sources of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Could you become a Hasidic Jew? Because when you go to Jerusalem, there's this big wall, and they're all down there by the wall doing this. You've seen them do that before, right?
Yeah, okay, but Hasidic Judaism is very recent, only within a couple of hundred years. So that doesn't have anything to do with the ancient
Hasidic,
Hasidic.
is that the ultra?
It's one group of extremely conservative Jews. Hasidic Jews are people who follow a rabbi who they consider to be the Messiah, and they follow the commands of that rabbi strictly.
Is that a person, a man, a living man?
Usually it's a living person, yeah. But sometimes the living person has passed away, and so they still follow the teachings of that rabbi. But usually it's almost always a living person.
And they call that their Messiah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they say, this is the Messiah here, and we are the community of the Messiah, and they will go to their Messiah and obey whatever it is that he tells them to do. It depends. Sometimes they will take whatever he said, write it down, and follow that strictly, and sometimes they'll choose another one. They'll choose a follow-up to that who will be the next Messiah, the next person that they
That
follow.
sounds
The
complicated.
men have long hair
Of course it
and
is.
beards down here, and they've got long, what do you
Well,
call
those are the ultra.
curl, they have curls, the men have
Yeah,
curls.
the curls, yeah. Right. Anyway, but this is very recent. This is a very recent development in Judaism. And so as far as Samaritans, so they were kind of seen as a cult. From the Jewish perspective, Samaritans are a cult. And because they have the wrong temple, They had the wrong way of worshiping God because it's not the same way as them, and they are half-breeds because they're half Canaanite and half Jewish.
But how would you know? They could infiltrate, and they'd look just like anybody else.
I mean, they were by this point in the first century, they were extraordinarily separated. So you could tell, just like the way that they could tell when somebody was from Galilee by their accent. They had a different accent, you know, and things like that. Also, Samaritans actually spoke a different form of Aramaic than the Jews did, because the Jews learned their main language that they used on an everyday basis, which is Aramaic. They learned it from Babylon, and the Samaritans were the children of the people who, children of the Jews who stayed in Israel and were not exiled, because they weren't part of the ruling class, they were part of the peasant class.
Say that again, the people that stayed, the peasant class, were they,
They were not exiled,
yeah,
and so
They were
they
the
stayed there, so
Samaritans.
they learned a different form of Aramaic
okay.
than the ones who were in Babylon.
Which actually probably also had a little bit of, the whole Samaritans are bad, probably had a little bit of roots in the peasant.
In the,
Ruler class.
exactly,
Well,
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, it's the mistreatment of the other.
Were the Pharisees more high and lifted up than the Samaritans?
Yes.
Mm.
We're not gonna get into the Pharisees right now. There's a great story. There's all these stories to tell about the Pharisees. Wow. And I will, and I just really want to get into that, but anyway. So the thing is that, so these guys, so as far as Jesus and this woman from Samaria, they are like day and night, completely different, supposed to be enemies, and Jesus is doing his best to break down that wall. And trying to communicate to her. And what ends up happening is she understands that he really is the Messiah. That he is, because she knows in her story from Samaria that there is supposed to be a Messiah, a Jewish Messiah, who is supposed to come and reconcile all these different forms of Judaism under him, including Samaritans, including the Samaritan version.
And that person did come, but it was a couple of 100 years ago, and then here, because then we have the Hasidic Jews. So that Messiah did come for the Jews a couple 100 years ago and created the Hasidic population.
No, the Messiah is Jesus. According to
The Jewish Messiah, this thing that they thought, because they didn't take Jesus for real, they killed him, is what they thought about him. So what they did is they picked up their own.
Okay, Tom,
Okay.
Hasidic Judaism is a modern development, and we're not
Modern.
talking about that.
Modern, it has
Okay.
nothing to do with
It has
Jesus.
nothing to do with Jesus or the Bible, which is what we're talking about.
Okay.
Okay, and so, and I deeply respect Hasidic Judaism, but I don't actually believe that it has any more truth than anything else that anybody developed. Okay?
Okay.
And so, so as far as what Jesus is talking about, Jesus is presenting, saying, yes, I'm the Messiah, and she recognizes that. So what's going on here? And then she goes and starts telling all the other people in her town, oh, hey, here's this guy, and he is telling me my entire life, and I think that he might be the Messiah. I think that he might be the one that we've been waiting for. And then she collects all of them and brings them to him, and he starts talking to them.
Does that say that in John?
Yes, it does. It's right there in
Okay,
John.
okay.
He starts talking to them, and then they say, oh my goodness, we believe you, meaning the woman. We believe what you said now, not because you just told it to us, but because we've talked to him and we understand that what you said is actually true. What happens here is not exactly a traditional marriage. Instead, what happens here is people joining, Samaritans joining the nation of Jesus. instead, which is a kind of a marriage. It is a unification of peoples, a unification of communities. So the Samaritan peoples and the nation of Jesus are unified, the same way that you would have two communities unified in a marriage.
So they were the first one to unify with Jesus, Samaritans, before anybody else, really.
No, because Jesus had disciples already.
Oh,
So
I know.
those disciples were
There's-
already under
There's 10 or
Jesus.
11, 12, there's 12 of those, but you could have hundreds of Samaritans that would have come in.
Okay, we already had hundreds of disciples too.
Yeah,
Just
there were-
because
there were
Jesus
actually
chose
already more,
12
yeah.
as special out of the hundreds that were already following.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
he had a lot of people.
And so, no, it's not just 12, he had a lot of people following him. And so the Samaritans just were joining in with the large groups that were already there. And so, but this is the thing, is that it is a kind of a marriage. It is a unification of very diverse communities. And it's interesting that this pattern of, here's a man coming to meet a woman at a well, and then two communities end up becoming merged through this marriage. And here we have a man coming and meeting a woman at a well, and here we have two communities being merged in Jesus. This is what we're going to get. And here is an example of a kind of a way that Jesus fulfilled Scripture. This is the thing, is that Jesus didn't just fulfill prophecy. He also fulfilled the tropes, the patterns in Scripture. Jesus repeated those patterns himself, and then we get to see the reality of how Jesus fulfilled those patterns, even the patterns that we don't think of.
Right,
So,
that's very interesting, yeah.
and so we see that Jesus is taking this pattern of the man coming from afar,
Right.
meeting the woman at the well, and he's using that to say, you see, this is something that we're supposed to pay attention to. This is the reality of marriage. The marriage is supposed to be the unification of all these peoples under Jesus into one nation. And so that's the thing that we're getting from John 4. It is very difficult for us to understand John 4 unless we went back to Genesis and Exodus and we saw how the stories were supposed to go before. We have to understand the pattern before we see how Jesus fulfills the pattern.
And the most salient thing for me about this whole thing in John 4 is it ends with, in my head, it ends with, go and sin no more. Doesn't it end with that? Doesn't it say that, go and sin no more here?
In John 4, no.
Or does it?
It doesn't.
Where does he say, go and sin no more?
That's a different person, and that's actually John 8.
John 8.
Yeah, that's John 8. And so, different passage,
Does he
same
tell-
book, different passage.
Does he tell the lady that he's not gonna condemn her?
In this one? No, she already knows that, because in the conversation, it's clear that he's not judging her. He told her the whole story and knew more about her than whatever she revealed, and yet,
He asked her for water.
he accepted her. He accepted her for who she was. So that was already there. That was already there in the conversation. And I think it's one of the things that really amazed her about Jesus, because he understood who she was, and he accepted her and desired for her to be a disciple. That was amazing. That was an amazing thing.
And then I have one other question about living water. From their bellies will come rivers of living water.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still just live water, which means water that's moving?
Well, Jesus says later on in John that the living water that he has to offer is the Holy Spirit. And so it's actually in John when we see Jesus talk about water, he's talking about giving of the Holy Spirit. And so,
She would have understood. She understood water, just running water.
she
But
thought it
that's
was
not
just
what he
running
was
water.
thinking.
Right, yep. And so, all right, does that make sense? And so this is the thing, I guess, a lot of times, especially if you're reading the Bible, and I just want to encourage everybody, read your Bibles and look for these patterns.
Well, Steve, how in the world would we be able to put that two and two and two and two together to make 8? How would we know where to look?
It is really difficult, but I'll tell you one way that you can do this. Something that, a tool that I use. There's a man named Robert Alter, and he's been doing translations of the Old Testament for a long time. So he has a translation of the book of Genesis. So you could just get his book of Genesis. And then if you read his notes to his translation, he will tell you, this is a pattern, this is the beginning of a pattern, and we see this pattern here and here and here and here. And we can, it actually, this is one of the ways that.
Did your professor show you this to begin with, or did you discover that through that book that you're telling us about?
So this particular one I found from Robert Alter, the one about the women at the well. But I certainly, when I was in school, yeah, I mean, they show, this is one of the classes that I took showed us this kind of reading the Bible. And so this is a way to see a natural way of reading the Bible. Nobody in the ancient world would take a single verse, pull that out, and just say, well, this verse is enough in and of itself. Everyone would look at the verses in context and look and see what are the stories that they're in the middle of, what is it that they're a part of, who spoke it, and how does that relate to me today? Everybody would do that. And nowadays, I was just listening just recently to a debate about the atonement. Different people having different points of view of the atonement, which is great. But the way that they were defending themselves is they were just taking little pieces of verses, stringing them together, and just saying, see, this proves my point. And I go, what you said biblically is a bunch of nonsense. Because you're taking a bunch of passages that have completely different contexts, stuffing them together and say, see, this is what I'm saying. And I'm like, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, but I could be duped by that.
I know.
People
And
can.
that's why you're here. And that's why you're here, for me to tell you, we need to read the Bible in context. We can't just take a little teeny passage and take it from the rest of what it's saying and then say, well, see, that fits with this and this and this. Well, it doesn't necessarily, and it does take work, and it takes a lot of reading in the Bible, but there are people to help us understand what the Bible is saying in context, and put it in normal, everyday English. And so, but, all right. Okay, so we're gonna stop with this today. I don't even know how to turn this off. How do you turn, I'm using this iPad, and I don't know how to stop. It's going.
Is it the camera on the iPad?
Uh-huh. It's not just the camera, it's the, now I'm looking at
Is it
Tom.
the church's iPad? Or
No, it's mine, but my problem is it's kinda new,
Okay.
and I don't know how to do it, so. Oh,
That's
are you
that's
sure
an
you
iPad
want to
too, isn't
stop
it?
streaming?